friends, this is Trish and welcome to Teacher Therapy. Today we have a very special guest named Dina, and she is going to talk to us about why she decided to leave the classroom after 10 years. And not just that, she is also the author of a book called Teacher Tired, where she has interviewed over 60 educators to find out why they left the classroom. So I cannot wait to find out everything today, Dina. But first, I would love to know what got you interested in becoming a teacher?
Sure. Well, thank you so much for having me. And I became a teacher really because of a teacher. I was in high school. His name was Dr. Percy Jones. He was a math teacher. He was probably what we would consider as the most strict math teacher back then. But some kind of reason I was just inspired by him. And even when I went off to college initially, my onset was I wanted to become a math teacher. So it was because of a teacher and that accountability that I didn't realize then, that now I do understand.
Yeah, definitely. And what were your first few years like in the classroom? Did you feel like your college experience prepared you for some of the things you'd encounter?
Well, I went into special education, and so there were a couple of things that I felt like I was exposed to, but not really prepared for. For special education teachers, writing IEPs, that first year is just a lot to deal with. And even though I had experienced it within my student teaching experience, it was just different. And then in terms of classroom management and students, I felt like I was a little prepared, but there was something that was missing. And I don't know exactly what that key thing is, because we're in the classrooms, we're experiencing, we're doing the thing. But it's just different from student teaching until you actually have your own classroom. And now that I'm saying this out loud, I'm pretty sure it's because the other teacher was in the room.
That is so true. And I would love to know, we've had a few special education teachers on, but what was the behavior like? What were some of the biggest behavioral challenges you went through?
Well, understanding that the students that I dealt with when they had these behavior challenges were because they had diagnosed issues. There were some that had, oppositional defiance with and without incident. Other just behavior issues. But the biggest one that I think that I dealt with in my early days, and as I say it again out loud, it's kind of cringeworthy. A student, she left the premises, and I didn't know what to do. I was actually instructed to follow her, and I literally followed her through the neighborhood to her aunt's house. That's what I was told to do. I don't recall if we got the authorities involved at that time, but that was kind of like the biggest thing. I've gone under tables and tried to coax children out. I've been kicked and I've been hit, but I do understand that in that population, I won't say that that's acceptable, but that's kind of what can happen.
Okay, that makes sense. And this is kind of a difficult topic, I know, to discuss. But do you believe that with the right behavioral support and structures in place, that a lot of the more out of control behavior could be managed? Or do you think it's something where no matter what's going on externally, they're going to have some of those same behaviors?
No, I think that if we had different supports in place, that could be mitigated even more. Meaning that, as we're special education teachers, and the curriculum that we went through that prepared us to be special education teachers said, okay, you should be able to deal with this. But some of the things that I know that I've dealt with, my peers have dealt with, were not something that we were prepared for in our preparation. So I think that there are other people that can be involved, other therapists, other psychiatrists, other professionals who actually have that experience, that in-depth experience of dealing with those types of behaviors should be incorporated into the school system. So that just means turning the entire system around.
Interesting. Yeah, I don't have a ton of experience with special education, but in a lot of the schools that I worked with, essentially the special education students would be in the general ed classroom. So that's about where my experience, ends. But the thing that I found kind of confusing and difficult is that a lot of them, you would have no idea that they had any kind of special education diagnosis. It seemed like they could process information, they could answer questions, have conversations. There didn't seem to be any differences, except we were told you cannot have any consequences for those students. So at the schools that allowed us to take away recess or have them walk laps at recess, they're like, you can't take any consequences no matter what they did. And so I felt like I noticed over the year, some of those students it seemed like their behavior escalated and got worse and worse and worse. And I'm thinking of one student in particular that it escalated from tiny little outbursts and slightly off comments the first 4 weeks of school to,
Mm-hmm.
kind of getting louder, to throwing desks, to cursing, to absolutely ripping apart bulletin boards, to full-blown meltdowns where the EMS had to come. So in my mind, that's not trained, I'm not an expert, I'm thinking if this was really something that he couldn't control, I feel like we would have seen that within the first 4 weeks. But it felt to me like it was just little boundary pushes here, there, and then he's like, oh, okay, nobody's going to do anything. It's party time. And so I know that that sounds insensitive to a lot of people, but I saw that pattern over and over and over again. And I'm just thinking, I'm sorry, I'm not buying it. I'm not buying that these kids can't behave. Now, I know that there are some, like
Right.
maybe on the extreme end of the autism spectrum, where they really, really struggle with regulation all the time, no matter
Right.
where they are. But there were
Mm-hmm.
so many kids, I hate to say like, oh, this kid seemed normal, but it really didn't seem like they were so out of control of their faculties that they couldn't behave. I know that was a lot, but what are your thoughts on that?
Sure, absolutely. Yes, I agree with you that I believe that there are some students that take advantage of their diagnosis. And so we'll talk about those students because there are students, as you stated, that that manifest for themselves, that have those types of issues. But I would say that that goes back to just having the other professionals in the pipeline that can assist us with understanding what's going on so that we're not always just relying on, okay, we just have to do this and this is the only thing that we can do or this is the only thing that we can't do. And they could recognize or they have the expertise to say, okay, yes, this indeed is the case. It can manifest itself here, it can manifest itself there. But I do know, just from my experience, that those students who have those types of issues that can control them to a certain degree, but then they can take advantage of that. And that's the part that as an educator, I'll just be honest, I want to teach your student the lessons, whether it's reading, math, or what have you. That's my role is teaching. I don't have, even in my preparation, we didn't have that preparation for the psychology, the full psychology of it. Yes, we were introduced to it and we understood, exposed to certain things, but there's just a whole side of that just needs to be incorporated. And I agree, there are students, especially as they get older, they say, oh yeah, I know I can do this and I can push this button and I know nothing's going to happen. So, that definitely happened.
Yeah. And I think something that seemed to really muddy the water for me, again, another slightly controversial take, but it really seemed like some parents desperately wanted their children to have the special education label for various reasons. And there were conversations had behind the scenes that if we don't do this, this parent is going to try to sue the school. And so I think what makes it so hard in the special education world is maybe there's a lot of students in there that do not belong there. They don't really need the services. There's other things going on. And then I think with the advent of all of the behavioral labels that really may not be linked to anything neurological, or I don't know what else. It may not be something that's an organic brain injury, but there's just kids that are behaving terribly, basically. The
Right.
temptation, I think, for admin is just to say we need to find a label for this kid, kind of maybe so we can move them out of the classroom or do something with them. And so I just think from what I've observed from the outside, there's so many students that maybe don't need the label, but once they have the label, it kind of feels like immunity, like there's nothing that can be done. And so I'm just curious, did you feel throughout your special education career like there was a lot of kids that really didn't need the services?
I will say that a couple of things that I'm hearing. One, I'm hearing like all or nothing. And that is something that tended to happen. It's either all of it or none of this. As soon as a parent comes forward and says that, this is the issue, the lean, we do have these steps that we need to take, the testing, the observations and things of that nature. But the lean was, okay, if the parent has asked for this, then this is what we're going to give to them. The other part that I'm hearing also is that as a general education teacher, and this is something that I experienced, that the general education teachers, they don't have a clue as to what's going on. They don't understand the 13 diagnosis. They don't understand, all the sides of special education. And so then it almost creates like this tension between the special education department and the general education department regarding students. And so absolutely, So I'm going to just speak to the instance of when it's not necessary. I've been in those experiences where it's just kind of like, okay, there could be some other mitigating things that we could do instead of just putting this label on the student. And so then now we're in a situation where the student has a special education services and they may not necessarily need them. But you can't, once you kind of cross that line, then you're over there. And I can think of a couple of students that I remember that they needed, in my opinion, they did need extra time to do certain tasks. But when it came to the other part of their IEPs in terms of their behavior, they absolutely could control it. And so that's the part that becomes just, when you cross that line and you say, okay, we're going to provide these services, then there's not this, it's all or nothing. And I feel like there could be some leeway in between. But then again, that's where, even though you do have the school psychologist that comes in and does the testing, and I'm not discrediting them at all, the battery of tests that they give covers what that covers. I feel like there's just another side to this equation when we're dealing with these types of students that we just don't have access to.
Definitely. Yeah. I've recently been exposed to the big, wonderful world of psychology, and it is so interesting how different certain tests can be. This is on the other side, of the world. But I recently have gone to someone to help diagnose one of my elderly, parents about whether or not they potentially have dementia. And it was crazy because one of the tests was like maybe 3 questions, you draw a clock, you remember a few things, but then some of them are these huge comprehensive tests that are really, really, I feel like it could actually answer the question, but the person chose to give this super, super simple one. And it's like, oh, it's fine. And I'm thinking it absolutely is not fine. And so I can only imagine, it's the same with kids. There's probably so many different tests that it could easily be written off as nothing. But then when you really probed, you find something, but just it's such a time intensive thing. It's so expensive. I could see how there would be a temptation to just make things as simple as possible to diagnose people.
Right. And you've hit something on the head, because what happens sometimes is there are 2 versions of the test. You can have like the longer version of the test, just like you're speaking of. And then as they go on, then they can, then they can give a shorter version of the test when they have the 3-year evaluations. And I always felt like, well, why are we giving this shorter version? And you said it cost and time. The school psychologists, especially if you have one in a small district, or you just have, they travel to different schools, the amount of in-depth that they would want to do and what they need to do. And I've talked with them, they say, oh, I would really love to be able to do the breadth of this test, but we have to do the short version of this test. And so that, again, it just speaks to just the resources that are not available to these students. And I feel like in terms of like education in general, it hasn't changed. It hasn't changed much over the last X amount of years. And so that aspect of it as well has not changed enough, because we have a lot of students now who are manifesting these types of behaviors. And once they're manifested, then we're just going to say, okay, let's go ahead and test them and put them in the system. But there may be other reasons, societal reasons, that are coming into play that are having these students manifest in this manner. So it's a lot. And to me, it just boils down to, we need more resources to be able to teach the students in a better manner.
Absolutely. And I would just love to dig more into some of your experiences. What would you say was one of your biggest struggles as a teacher?
One of my biggest struggles as a teacher, to be honest, and I hate to say this like this, but it's just dealing with administration and whether their hands were tied because they couldn't do certain things. But it really boiled down to, because I had decent classroom management, I felt like I did. But when the opportunity availed itself to have to bring in admin, I kind of felt that it was not met with the same level of fidelity and can you deal with this student and in a manner where they understand that there's a consequence for their behavior. My last 5 years in particular was in high school. And that's when it really felt like there are, and just looking around as well, like there are no consequences. And my biggest struggle was always the phone. And I had a policy where once you cross the threshold of my door, I don't want to see your phone. And I felt like that was a reasonable request. I will, and I'll even tell you, oh, put your phone in your book bag. Don't come in here. I don't want to see your phone. And time again, the phone was the issue. And I give you X amount of times. And then once I write you up, now I'm being looked at as, the bad person, even amongst peers. I think that was a big struggle as well, is that even amongst peers, I felt like, oh, she's making such a big deal out of the phone. But if we were all consistent, then it wouldn't be as much of a problem. I would say that was the biggest thing was for me was kind of like on the admin side, if I had to rank them. But they're all ranked right underneath each other.
Okay, absolutely. And I know a big complaint that I've heard from a lot of special education teachers is just the IEP process in general. Was that something that was kind of hard to navigate for you?
Yes, it was. Thank you for bringing that back to my attention. Because when you have to write an IEP with Fidelity, it takes a lot of time. So you're already teaching, you already have a classroom, you already have your caseload, which means the caseload is that you have students who you write your IEPs for. Usually you have 13 to 20, depending on what school you're at. And it almost felt, no, let me rephrase it. It didn't almost feel like you're always taking IEPs home. I finally got to the place where I was better at writing IEPs off the clock. But there's not enough time in the day to really do what you need to do with an IEP, with Fidelity during the classroom, during the school day hours. So you have your break that you have, your planning period. And if you're in elementary school, then you have, when the students go to music, music gym or art, and there's just not enough time in a school day to actually do all of the writing and all of the research. And then you have to get information from other teachers. And then if they don't want to give you that information in a timely manner, then now I'm bugging you to give you this information. And then that just goes back to what I was saying earlier about general education teachers not really understanding what is needed from them. And so a lot of times I've been in situations where, and my peers have said this as well, when we go to the gen ed teacher, it's an issue. But I would say that that's definitely a thorn in the side for special education teachers.
Definitely. And kind of going along with that, I know that sometimes with IEPs or 504 plans, there's kind of rules about maybe how much work a student has to do. And I just remember when I was in the classroom, it would be kind of challenging because I would feel like we would give the grade level test to the special education teacher and then they would work with them in a small group, but then it would come back perfectly done. And I was thinking, did the kid do that? And so there's a lot of hairy stuff kind of going on with grading and kind of knowing that they have to pass no matter what. And kind of, I know I would feel sometimes like they weren't being pushed as hard as they had the capacity to be pushed. But I know it kind of goes back to that other debate from earlier. Like sometimes it looks like they can do more than they can do, but then we don't know what's going on in their mind and heart and emotions. And so there's that tug of my instinct is to just want to push everyone. Like, you can do it, you can do it. But I don't want to be cruel if somebody really, really is lacking the ability to understand something or that's just not where they are. So can you kind of tell us about what you noticed just with that poll and that whole conversation?
Yes. I will say that I hate that that you experienced that. I do know that, that does happen. In terms of with the special education students and their work, again, it goes back to let's have the time to do what we need to do. And so because the general education teacher and the special education teacher may not have been able to collaborate properly because there's just not time to do that. Because when you have to adjust a general education test, that takes time. So which means that I have to get that from the general education teacher in enough time for me to adjust it so that to the level that the student is able to attain. But what happens a lot of times is just, and this is not a blame game, this is not a pointing fingers at either of them. It really speaks to the system. There's just not enough time to really adjust those types of, well, in other words, as a special education teacher, really, I was taking things home. I would get the curriculum, I would take it home, I would ask for it in advance as much as possible. And I'm sitting at home redoing what, the general education, let's say it's a worksheet or a lesson on reading or a lesson on math, I'm redoing it. I'm adding all of the adjustments that I can use in order to help that student. But it's that time crunch. And like you said, some teachers, unfortunately, they have that pressure from their special education department that says, yes, this student has to pass. And so then it comes back and it looks like, okay, well, I've helped this student along the way. And another reason that can happen is when you're sitting in there with the student and they're going over the questions because they have to pass, you're like, okay, well, no, go back and do that again.
Mm-hmm.
And so now you've got a multiple choice test and you've done it 3 times. Finally, you're going to hit the one that's correct. And so now it comes back to the gen ed teacher. So there's a lot of pressure coming on all sides, but it speaks to the system and not for what's going on in the hearts of us as teachers.
That makes perfect sense. And I'm kind of curious, what was it like working with parents? Did you find them as advocates and allies? Were they a thorn in your side? What was going on with parents?
Well, I found them, those who were an advocate were great. I had good relationships with lots of parents, so I don't want to blanket them, but the ones who weren't were the ones who really just didn't want to listen, who didn't want to have conversations. They want to curse you out, and I don't feel like that's necessary in any situation. That you feel like you get to curse at me or even curse me out and to yell at me while I'm calling you on the phone about your student. I was really good at sandwiching. I'm really good at saying, hey, Miss Tanya, this is Mrs. Beavers, and I'm calling you in regards to whoever, and I'm going to sandwich it. I'm going to tell you something good. And then I'm going to come in and I'm going to say, May, what's going on? Because I understand nobody wants to have, be called. And the first thing that you hear is, my student thus, and thus. But I've been in many situations where I've been yelled at. And I got to the point where I just said, once a parent started yelling at me, I said, okay, I'm going to end this conversation now. And then I would hang up. Now, I shouldn't have to feel that way towards you. But those are the situations that we are placed in. The one situation, I don't know, maybe I'm jumping ahead, but the one situation that really made me say, you know what, this is it. This is the end. And it was a combination between admin and a parent. And it was COVID. And it was the height of COVID. And so in my state, we had went back much sooner than a lot of other states had. And I had to have a meeting with a student. Oh, it's all 3 coming together. It was about the phone. And the long short is that I told my admin, I said, I really don't want to be in the room with anyone. We were already doing virtual lessons. We had some students coming in and some students that were online. So it wasn't that we couldn't do anything virtually. And I said, can I have this meeting, virtually? And I don't know if he asked the parent. I think he had asked the parent, would you want to do this? And in my mind's eye, at the height of COVID, and I'm your teacher, and I'm asking this simple thing. I'm not asking not to meet the person, but I am asking, can we just do this virtually? No, he asked the parent. The parent said they wanted to meet. And so there I was sitting, I'm almost about to cry. There I was sitting in the room with people that I just didn't want to be in the room with because it was at the height of COVID at that time. And that's when I was just like, wow, this is where we're at. And this is how you feel about the situation. And that's when I said, you know what, I don't want to do this anymore.
I totally understand. I actually quit in 2021 in the pandemic season 2. And I know people have so many different feelings about everything related to that topic, but the takeaway that I felt was that teachers are at the absolute bottom of the list of administrators' cares. That just came through so clearly with all the chaos and all the different rules and like bringing all the kids back for the last 4 weeks of school when we had been hybrid. It was just chaos. and an absolute disaster and so stressful because we were getting hit from everywhere at that time with parent complaints and students doing nothing in school and misbehaving and just constant changes, never based on talking to the teacher and seeing how they felt, but always based on something, from the outside that they were trying to mitigate. And it just came through over and over and over again, like, oh, they really don't care about us as teachers at all. And that feeling, it just finally sunk through. And I was just like, why am I doing this? Like, I'm not doing this anymore. And I ended up leaving in April of 2021. I was just like, I literally can't even finish out the school year. So I can feel, where you're coming from with that. It was just a really shocking experience overall. And so I'm kind of curious, did you have any other things like that just were kind of earth shattering in the realm of teaching where you're like, I don't know about this field?
Well, I think that even before that happened, actually, I was getting to the place, and I had gotten to the place where I did want to leave because I said, okay, well, maybe I can go into administration. And it really boiled down to, for me, and I had good classroom management, but it was the level of respect and some of the ways that some students felt that they could talk to you. And so if I had to put it on a spectrum of the way that students talk to me versus what I know the other teachers experience, I would say I know a lot of other teachers have experienced worse than I have. But it was getting to that place where it just didn't feel like this was school and that this was beneficial. And so there's two things that were going on in my head, to be honest. It was that part of it where, okay, this just doesn't feel like this is school, which made me start to think about, well, maybe we need to change how school is done, and realizing that was not going to happen, in the interim, in the short interim. And then the other part of it that started to play within my head was I was teaching a subject, and I love math. I absolutely loved it, and I enjoyed geometry, and I love teaching geometry, but I kind of felt like, well, maybe they could be learning something else or less of what we're teaching them. I started just getting I guess, philosophical and thinking, okay, it would be great if they had a class on how to deal with budgets, like if that was mandatory. And because I was teaching special education, the students that I taught, they had mild learning disabilities. So you wouldn't know it to look at them that they had these types of issues. But they really were struggling with some of the concepts that I had to teach them for geometry. So whereas you were experiencing one end of the spectrum, I was on the other end of the spectrum where, yes, I still had to bring forth all of the concepts for a particular subject. And I could not, oh goodness, and I'm forgetting a lot of the terms right now. Modify versus, there's two terms. One of them is to modify it. And then one of it is to truncate it completely. And that was the one that I really couldn't do. I couldn't take away. I always had to still present the concept. And so that's what made me kind of just say, you know what, I don't want to do this anymore.
Absolutely. And I would love to come back to kind of the classroom management and the defiance and the disrespect, because the one thing that drives me crazy from like a professional development standpoint is when they put it all back on the teacher and they just say, if you were more fill in the blank, these kids wouldn't disrespect you. If you were more this or that. And it's like, I can tell that you are an awesome lady and an awesome classroom manager. And I don't think that you strike me as the person that'll just take a bunch of foolishness, but the kids still felt free to be foolish. So can you kind of tell me about some of the things that the kids were doing to be disrespectful, and kind of what did you try and how did it work? I just love to hear more about that.
Sure. One of the bigger things is just a lot of talking. A lot of talking when I'm trying to talk. It was a constant battle to just keep control of the talking. When you're in a classroom and you're trying, classroom management has to do with rapport and all that other stuff and being prepared and making sure you have everything ready. And that's part of the energy level of teachers. It's like you're constantly on. And so when students would say things to me, it's a constant, it was always like putting out fires. Okay, pay attention. Let's stay focused. Stop talking over there. Okay, let's get back to what we're doing. It was a constant battle of that. And in terms of, I've had some students curse at me, and it was really bad. But one of the things that I would always do, and I would say, get the last word. And then they would, I'd say, okay, go ahead and get the last word. And then we would go back and forth with just a little bit of that. And then they realize they're never going to get the last word because, and that's another reason why I felt like, why are we here? Why is this going on? Why is this contention going on? And why is it that there's no understanding of you're not out there with your peers. You're in a different setting. So I understand when you're out there with your peers, you say, you do whatever, but this is the classroom. This is how this is supposed to run. And they have no understanding of boundaries. And they don't understand, I call it the rules of engagement. That aspect of teaching has just left. And yeah, I've had a few students, yell at me or what have you. But then again, like I said, where am I going to send you to? I've sent you out a couple of times. So now I have to just deal with you. And they were yelling not because of, some diagnosis. These were instances where they just, don't want to do the work or just want to do what they want to do. We're doing this at this time. So that aspect of it has absolutely gone out the window. The rules of engagement, students understanding their place and, the role of the teacher and just being able to manage themselves. That's what I found towards the end, is that ability to self-control and to self-manage was absolutely going out the door. And you can't control anyone. Like, you can't physically control them. So, and not that you would want to, but you know what I mean?
I agree 100%. And that has been kind of one of the battle zones, just kind of talking to people. Is I hear people say all the time, kids have always been like this, nothing has changed. They'll say things like, we're just catching it more because of social media, but there weren't cameras before. But I'm like, you can't gaslight me on this because I was there. I, grew up, going to school in the 90s and the early 2000s. And there was a difference. It's just like kids knew that you would have to be crazy to cuss at a teacher's face. You would have to be crazy to kind of square up to a teacher and look them in the eye and say, no, I'm not doing this. You would have to be insane. And it's not like I was in these super rich, fancy areas. I went to some Title I schools growing up too. And even there, the worst misbehavior was not in the classroom. It was in passing periods. It was in the cafeteria, maybe at recess when it was more peers together and kind of less teacher supervision. But the literal worst thing I could think of a student ever doing to a teacher was one goofy boy called the teacher earmuffs because her hair covered her ears a little bit. And I thought that was scandalous. I was like, oh, he's making fun of the teacher. But these days, I've been called the B word to my face. I've had students say the most outlandish things to me. And it's so difficult to convince people that don't believe it, that no, kids are different today. And so I'm curious about, why do you think that is?
I firmly believe that it has to do with the lack of human exposure and more on the cell phones and more constantly looking at the screen. We were having a conversation at work yesterday, literally, about how we used to go outside and play kickball. And there was not this isolation, this total time of isolation. And I don't have those types of degrees, but I absolutely believe that the lack of just, I call it human connection, peer-to-peer connection, and that's over time. In terms of parenting, I believe that a lot of parents want to, and I believe that they say the things that need to be said, but they're just not, they don't care about their parents either. I've been in situations in meetings where the child is talking to the parent any old kind of way, but I also can feel and know that parent is not just one to accept that. So I don't know, just it goes back to the rules of engagement in terms of why student behavior is the way that it is. And it goes unchecked and it goes unmatched. And so now what we have is 1 or 2 have done it, 3 or 4 have done it, 5 or 6. So now it's exponential, to be honest with you. That's how I honestly feel about it right now. It's absolutely exponential. And in terms of the classroom, because there are no consequences, okay, I'm gonna send you to ISS, in-school suspension. What? When you go to in-school suspension, one, you're just sitting there. You can put your head down. You can have your AirPods in your ear with your hoodie on. You're supposed to do your work. But it's nothing like, it's a vacation, to be honest. For those students who really just don't care, they don't care. They don't care. And I'll spin that wheel back around to that schools and education needs to change so that it is more interesting for them, that it is more engaging for them. So no, that doesn't warrant their behavior. But in at the same time, I think if they were more involved, we can't compete with that with that phone and what's going on that phone. So we have got to have systems in place and education in place for them that they want to learn and that they're interested in. Because when they are interested in something, you don't have those types of behaviors. You won't have them en masse. Then it will go back to, like, I remember when I was growing up, you know, you, like they said, you always had a student who made bad decisions, but it wasn't en masse. And I think that if we could just steer a lot of things, put a lot of things in place, then I feel like it'll get better. I feel like it really will.
Yeah, and I guess my theory is, it maybe sounds a little grim, but my theory is the lack of negative, slightly uncomfortable consequences has caused all this to go crazy.
Oh
Because
yeah.
I kind of feel like the things that kept us in line in the 90s was a knowledge and an assurance that some painful or at least uncomfortable consequences were coming our way. Whereas modern parenting and modern schooling emphasizes almost a peer-to-peer relationship with
Mm-hmm.
students and children, because they're all about, we've got to talk about it. We've got to explain to them. We've got to reason. We're going to sit in a circle and we're going to share our feelings. And I just don't think that works for kids. Maybe I'm missing something, but I don't think it works. And so my instinct is to say, keep the good stuff that we've, developed in modern times, which is being more engaging, being more relational, trying to understand and be empathetic. That's not bad, but I do kind of feel like we've got to bring back some of the old school consequences. I think the dilemma, though, is that parents are not about that life. They just don't want consequences. They don't want them. They will fight the school. They will sue the school.
Absolutely. They will fight the school. They will sue the school. And that's why, you have in-school suspension, because really when and they still have out-of-school suspension, but it's not readily as used. But then when they go home, they're like you said, bringing back some of those old school negative consequences. If you do something, then you're going to lose your phone. You're going to lose your television privileges. You're going to lose the ability to do this. And balance that. Right now, we're like you're saying, we are terribly out of balance. There are few negative consequences. There are so many hoops that you have to jump through in order to get to that negative consequence. And you know what, too? Even if it wasn't just so much as a negative consequence, what's happening is, because you have all of this disruption that's going on in the classroom, then you have the students who are really trying to do well, and you're constantly engaging with them, if nothing else, for the sake of the students who want to do well, or for the sake of the students who aren't disruptive, remove them for whatever reason and in whatever capacity. I know that there are alternative schools, but I feel like like you said, the balance of that is now affecting the students who are in the classroom who want to learn. Because I assure you, across America, the teachers who are engaging with students, that time that you have to deal with that student, whether it's one student or two students, and I forgot, you did bring something back to my memory. I remember I was teaching fourth grade and I was subbing, and I was a long-term sub, and it was time to go to lunch. And I said, okay, everybody, we're going to line up quietly and we're going to go to lunch. And they didn't line up quietly. So I said, okay, let's try that again. I mean, it was really like not quiet. And then it got to like maybe about the third time, they were turning over tables. And this was not a special education class. They literally were like, and I was just like, oh my goodness, this is a bit much. And I called in someone to deal, to help me deal with that. Because I'll be honest, it was in my first year of teaching. And so I was subbing long term, and I didn't know exactly what to do. But, it's the expectation was, can we just line up quietly? And that wasn't happening. The other point that I'll make is I was teaching at a non-Title I school. And so, some of the behaviors are the same, and they are absolutely different. So that level of frustration, it doesn't matter, Title I, non-Title I, urban, suburban, or rural, as I say, en masse, I'll leave it at that.
I agree 100%. And I'm curious, you made me think of the debate kind of about inclusion versus having separate classrooms. What do you think about that for special education? Do you think it's more beneficial And maybe even for kids with the more behavioral issues, for them to just always be in a separate setting? Or what are your thoughts about that?
Sure. I think that for students who can handle the inclusion classroom, if they have the proper supports, that's beneficial. But there are students who do need to be in different environments, and I can recall in one district that there is a school, for those students who have oppositional defiance. I remember I was tutoring someone, and it just couldn't happen. We would sit down, and if they didn't want to do it, they didn't want to do it. And that was the end of the story. So I feel like there is a threshold, and I feel like that we do need to include those students who can be in those environments where it's not totally disruptive. Now, there's a difference, in my opinion, between like behavioral disruption and then, let's say, you have some students who are on the spectrum that may not be able to contain themselves as readily as other students, but they're able to do the work. As long as they have a teacher in there that's supporting them, I think that's okay, as long as it's not, like I said, to the point where it's disrupting the learning process. But for those students, you're bringing back a lot of memories in terms of when you talked about, we had a student in elementary, and when he would get upset about something, and he got to the point where he would start disrupting the class, going through and tearing off the items off the bulletin board, ripping, tearing up books, throwing desks. I kid you not. They had a contingency plan for the students. So the students literally knew it was time to line up, walk out, and go into the hallway. And that, to me, and that was in my early days, I remember. And that happened more than once. And it just felt wrong.
Mm-hmm.
And again, this student has those types of diagnoses. So I don't blame the student, but I do blame, okay, why couldn't we have something in place for these students? Because that was several years ago, and that's still going on. You mean to tell me somebody couldn't come up with a solution by now, come up with other resources to help these students? But I remember that. And that, again, goes back to now their day is disrupted to a point that's severe. And now they suffer a level of either trauma or now I'm used to this. And not to not have empathy for that student. At the same time, what about the other 20 students? Yeah.
I'm with you all the way. And I don't know if this is me becoming cynical, but I don't believe in oppositional defiance disorder, because I guarantee if they got put in a military school, they would not be acting like that. I would love for somebody to send me a scientific study showing me like a brain scan and pointing to a part of the brain that's offline to prove that oppositional defiant disorder is real. But I feel like that is a demonstration of a child not having experienced consequences. I don't know.
Yeah.
Maybe I'm wrong. I reserve the right to be wrong.
And you know what? I don't have enough information to say to even debate that with you.
Yeah.
I just know that's the one that was probably the highest. I had students who had that. I had another student who had what was it? It was bipolarism, but it was bipolarism, but it was at a certain age they don't like to call it that, so it had another name.
Mm-hmm.
So I will go with what you tell me, psychologist. But at the same time, like I said, so then whatever this behavior is, even let's say it didn't exist, mm-hmm. and let's just say that's just how that student is choosing to exhibit themselves. Mm-hmm. Let's deal with that in a different manner, because if you have enough of them, then you should have a system in place to be able to deal with that, because there's too many students out there, other students who are suffering because of that, in their education wise. And then we're not prepared for that. Mm-hmm. I don't care what you say. As an educator, we are not prepared in our training for that. There are some teachers that may say, well, I'm prepared for it because I can deal with it, but not in the training. That's not fair. I don't think it's fair.
Totally. Yeah, I know the very first place I worked at was actually a really nice charter school, and they had a gigantic security guard that if we called, they would come and pick the kid up and carry them off if the kid was refusing. And I think I only had to call him 2 or 3 times and say, hey, this kid's refusing to move. Can you come help me out? But I think something much more like that would be appropriate rather than having to evacuate the whole class. But I know for everything I say, I can hear the arguments in my head of why someone would say that that's wrong. But I'm kind of with you. It's just that this kind of out of control behavior shouldn't be allowed to just happen and tear
Right.
apart classrooms.
Yes, no, it absolutely should not continue to happen. And I will always go back to, can we change the system? And if you're not going to change the system, you know what I'm an advocate for? Leaving. 100% leaving. You could shut the whole thing down, in my opinion. And then you'll have to fix it. But as we trickle out, then you're not able to fix it because the bleed is just a little bit. You can just take a little tissue and just kind of wipe away the blood. But if enough of us are able to leave and decide to leave, then maybe some real changes would come into play.
Absolutely. And I'm kind of curious, were there any other issues within education that we kind of haven't touched on that just added to the basket of reasons of why you eventually wanted to go ahead and leave?
No, not off the top of my head. Aside, like I said, being philosophical, and just student behavior, parent behavior. I just dealt with that when I took charge and said, you're not going to deal. You're not going to talk to me this way. This is not going to happen. And that's what I would advocate for other teachers as well, that are still in the classroom. Do not let them talk to you that way. You don't have to yell back, but just let them know that I cannot continue to have this conversation with you. And then you just hang up the phone. Don't wait for it to come to a resolution. Just let it go.
Absolutely. You're reminding me of this awkward situation where at one of the schools I worked at, the lady at the front desk would just let parents come up to the classroom. And sometimes you might get a courtesy call, but sometimes not. So this one particular day, I had a mom just roll up at my door. So I step outside the classroom to see what she's wanting. And this is kind of an embarrassing, weird story. But basically what happened was she had a daughter and she was upset that they weren't student of the week. And so this happened to be a African-American mom and an African-American daughter. And this mom accused me of being racist. And I'm Black as well, in case the audience doesn't know, for not choosing her Black daughter. And she's just accusing me. She's literally like eyeball to eyeball with me. And then the vice principal kind of comes out to see what's going on. And I'm like, wow, thank you for showing up. But it was just crazy because she's like, well, I just can't believe that you would do this. And I was like, well, I can't believe that you as a mom are out here talking to me like this. And then the VP was like, whoa, let's just back it up. Because I don't want to end up on the news for fighting a mom. But it's so crazy what teachers go through. And so I'm just kind of curious. I know we've touched on a lot of different things, but what are some of the changes in the system that you would like to see to kind of turn things back around?
Sure. This is totally idealistic, but just more teachers in the classroom or smaller classrooms, and then clear accountability. I think the one thing, and I'm going to segue a little bit, and I am plugging, but I'm not plugging. But in my book, what I found was, and I ended up interviewing actually 100 teachers, but only 60 of them. I could only get like 63 of them in the book. But that was the main thing, was admin. And I don't know what's going on with admin. It's across the board. It's urban, suburban, and rural. It is Title I and not Title I. I don't care who I talk to. I would say over 90% of them were like, the administration was just not supportive in terms of what they needed. And what support looked like was when it came to student behaviors. I heard more than one time, and I didn't experience this, but I heard more than one time, students were sent back with candy. What are you talking about? If we could, idealistic is more teachers in the classroom or smaller classrooms. Okay, but not idealistic is don't send them back with candy. That was what the biggest thing that was brought out in these interviews. Another thing that I would change is absolutely what is being taught, especially at the high school level. I have a English, I have a teacher friend who's an English teacher, and we didn't fight over this, but I told her, you can fight me on this. I said, I don't need to read Romeo and Juliet again. And she was going into all of the things that Romeo and Juliet brings out. And I was just like, okay, I'll acquiesce a little bit. But the amount of time that is spent on some of these subjects in certain, I think they just need to be re-examined, because we're living in this society in 2025, and we need to be able to keep up. And I firmly believe that all of that needs to be looked at. That would be my ideal situation: smaller classrooms, looking at the curriculum, and having more teachers in the classroom, especially at the younger grades. Even if the classrooms are smaller, then being able to help them to read and to write. Because what's happening now is, when I'm significantly older than you, but when I was coming up, we wrote grocery lists. We helped our our parents with the grocery list. We went grocery shopping. We were reading the groceries that were on the, in the aisle. We got the newspaper, and we might have done the crossword puzzle and things of that nature. A lot of those things are not happening now, because when you go to the store and you want your child to not, do anything, you just give them the iPad. And I get the scene. Like, I get it. I understand why, but these are the consequences that are happening. And even if it is an educational one, I had someone tell me that, oh, they're watching, I don't know, Miss Rachel. And I said, that's fine, but they're not engaging like they used to. So I think that, in my opinion, that would be the big thing. But that number one, based on my interviews, whatever's going on with admin and this support issue, that needs to happen. If I have more than 90% people saying it, then that's a problem.
Definitely. And I would love to know too, just when you went through all those interviews, are there any really shocking stories that stood out to you that come to mind that even you, knowing what you know about education, were like, whoa, now that's crazy?
Yeah, well, I've had lots of teachers. They talked about, battling students, being, in terms of, being kicked, in terms of, being physically, physical altercations. Um, a lot of times it really it kept boiling down to that admin and not being supported when student behavior, or also the expectation to, and we touched on this briefly, the expectation to pass students, the expectation of, okay, they didn't do what they needed to do, but you still have to some kind of way pass them. And so that's not always just, okay, you got a F, I'm going to give you a D, but that may mean, okay, I may adjust this assignment this way, or adjust it that way, so that these students are passing. Those were some of the main ones that stood out for me. And a lot, I think this is where you and I might be. When I left, I was just like, okay, it hurt me, but I think I just, and what I mean by, like, I toughed up on it. Like, okay, this is what I'm going to do. This is what I'm going to do. And as I was going through these interviews, I really realized that I had suppressed it. So I called it toughening up, but I really had suppressed some of the feelings. There's interviews when I was talking with teachers, and we're both in tears, because they're explaining, just how they felt. The mental anguish, because especially for us as teachers that wanted to do this all our lives, and then we get into the situation, and it's not only is it not like we thought it was going to be, it's even worse. And the anxiety that can come with that. There were quite a few teachers who mentioned it, even in the book, that they had to seek therapy because of this. And people that don't understand that, people that are not teachers, or teachers that don't understand that, that's a real thing. That's an absolute real thing, because you go through the trauma. A lot of teachers compared it to being in an abusive relationship. And I didn't realize that, that you're constantly trying to do what's right, and you're being gaslighted, or there is no change. And you can't change anything. There are a lot of teachers that compared it to that as well. Yeah. The stories that I have in the book unfold in two ways. The original purpose was to show teachers, hey, you can do anything. Not anything, but you can do a lot of things. You can go into this. You can be a computer science. You can go into program management. You can go into instructional design. You can go into all kinds of things. But I started asking one question: why did you leave education? And the floodgates opened up. And so I know that a lot of teachers will be able to relate, but we all have the same story, but it's different. It absolutely is.
Definitely. And I would love to know, by the time you left, would you say that you were at a place of disillusionment, or would you say that that happened early on and you kind of just tried to outrun it until you're like, I'm out of steam here?
Once I made the decision that I was leaving, it was almost like a plug just undrained. And it was just like, and I said, I'm done. And then I started trying to figure out what I wanted to do next. I literally typed into the computer, what else can a teacher do? Because I just didn't know. And so for me, it wasn't as much of a process. Like I said, as I started talking with people, I'm like, oh, really? Oh, wow. I did have some issues with that. But for me, I just shut it out. I did what but I made up in my mind, I'm still going to do what I need to do for my students, but I'm not doing that extra stuff. I'm not making extra videos. My husband used to get on me so bad all the time. You're always doing this and you're always doing that and you're always, doing extra work, after school, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I literally, when the day was done, I might have did a little bit, but when the day was done, I just shut it down. And in terms of just disillusionment regarding the education system, I just looked around and just said, something has to change. And it was almost like a light bulb went off, because you're in the grind and you're doing and you're doing, and you realize that there are issues. You realize that student behavior is off the chain. You realize that admin is not very fair, but it's like you have on blinders or scales over your eyes. It really, because otherwise you wouldn't do it. You wouldn't stay in it. For the teachers who are getting out in 3 years, their eyes are open real quick. But for those of us who stayed 5, 10 years, even though it's, some people will say, oh, it wasn't this bad back then. You're right, it wasn't this bad back then, but it still wasn't great. It's not been great for a long time. And I don't want to say if ever, but it's not been great for a long time. So we've had scales over our eyes for a very long time. And I think once I made that decision, it was like the veil was lifted. And it was just like, oh my goodness, this is bad.
Absolutely. And I'm kind of wondering, it sounds like the answer is no, but I'll ask anyway. Did you battle a little bit of guilt afterward? And then did your feelings start to get better and brighter? Or would you say you were like, oh, I'm good, like right after, and then didn't kind of deal with that guilt?
I had a little bit of guilt. I'll be honest. I did have a little bit of guilt in terms of the students, and because I left at the end of a year, so that was an advantage for me. But it was really at the start of another year, so I had like that summer to kind of just deal with it. I didn't turn in my notice really until July, so I was looking. So I had a chance to kind of just back away from that guilt, so that when the position when I got the offer for the position in July, which was actually 2 weeks prior to when we were supposed to return to school, where teachers were to return to school. At that moment, I kind of felt guilty, but really I was kind of like, I'm done. And because of how I felt, or the lack of feeling that I had from admin, and it's not personal, because I feel like since it's so broad, that there must be pressure that they're under. It can't be, since we're all saying the same thing, then they have a certain level of pressure or something that's coming on them. But yeah, I let it go. But a lot of my teachers that I interviewed, they did have really heavy guilt, because some of them left in the middle of the school year. And even though you have that guilt, that mental health piece, I tell teachers all the time, tomorrow they will have a replacement for you. Whether it's a sub, whether they split the kids, the feeling that we have that we are so important to this, to what's going on. Unfortunately, that is not the case. I don't care what you have up in your classroom. I don't care what you're teaching. I don't care how you're teaching it. If you die tomorrow, it's over. And it's the same thing. If you leave, it's the same thing. They're going to find a replacement for you. And so we have that feeling like, oh, they can't do this without me. No, they absolutely can.
Yeah, that's the truth. That's the truth.
I hate to say it like that.
It is true. It really is. So I would love to know, what kind of advice would you give to a teacher that who knows how many years, maybe it's 1 year, maybe they're 5 years in, and they're feeling that tug, like they just don't know if it's going to be worth it to try to retire as a teacher, let alone stay in another 5 years. How would you talk a teacher through those feelings?
Sure. I would let them know that if that's how you're feeling now, then to pursue that, you know, to go ahead and look into some other things that you feel like you want to do. I feel like there's a difference between the angst of being a teacher and then, okay, it's time to leave. So that's where you have to really say, okay, is this just, I'm a little burnt out, because there are teachers who want to stay and who can stay, and that's good for them. And that doesn't mean that they always feel good all the time. So for those, you have to kind of differentiate, where am I on this spectrum? If you do decide that, yes, I don't want to do this anymore, but I have financial obligations and I have this and I have that. I had people who were single income with families. They were able to leave. I can think of one teacher in particular. She taught for 20 years and she left. I can't think of Tiffany's last name, but she's a data scientist right now. And she taught math for 20 years. And now she's in data science. Begin to think about what else you can do. And there is something else that you can do. I don't have 65 different careers, but I probably have about 40 different careers. And I interviewed 100 people. If 100 people can do it, 1,000, this is my thing. And if 1,000 people can do it, then you can. And so also what helped me was to partner with someone else who was leaving. But before you even get to that place, just look around. Look at people that you know that are not in education. And sometimes that's kind of hard because we all have teacher friends. But look around and see what other careers are out there. You have to start to investigate, because you have to get over that hurdle, especially if you're someone who really all your life, that's all we wanted to do was teach. There's nothing else up here. There's nothing else. There's nothing else for us to lean into. And so you have to begin to do that, to investigate that.
That's excellent advice. And my final question would be, what do you wish everybody knew about a teacher's job or role? That could be admin, parents, society. What do you wish people understood about teaching?
Oh, wow. That's a loaded question, because one thing that I read recently, and I didn't realize it, is that we have so many interruptions in our day. Like, we normalize that as teachers, but there are so many micro interruptions in our day than there are for many of the other fields, that I don't think people really realize that. Like, not controlling, but I'll say it that way, but controlling students and controlling student behavior. When you physically can't go over there and pick Johnny up and put him in the chair, it exudes a lot of energy. And then let's take away all the negative and let's make it positive. It takes a lot of energy to be in front of a classroom for 6 hours a day. That a level of energy that exudes, you are always on. You're always on. And so I think that a lot of people don't understand. They just think, oh, you're working out of a book. I can't remember the last time I worked out of a book. And even if I did work out of a book that had all of the answers, I'm still providing instruction. And so a lot of people just think that, I feel like a lot of people think it's just babysitting. And even the worst teacher is not babysitting. They are still exuding some level of energy for students during the day. And it does take a lot more. Just because we've all had teachers, I think that's part of it too. This will be the last thing that I'll say. We've all had teachers, rather. And so we think that it's easy. Well, they made it look easy. So it's a lot more difficult than what you may think it is.
That is the truth. Well, this has been an awesome interview, Dina, and I'm going to link your book in the description so that people can find it. Audience, thank you so much for watching. If you want to interview with me, you can email me at teachertherapytrish@gmail.com. Please don't forget to like and subscribe and share this with a friend. And let us know what you think in the comments. We'd love to hear from you, and we'll see you guys next time. Bye for now, everyone.